Today is June 28th, 2014, exactly 100 years since the First Weltkrieg began. Television networks across the world broadcast live footage of a global remembrance of the conflict being held in Berlin, the capital of the German Empire. This day, the world remembers those who lost their life throughout 2 Weltkrieks and 1 Kalterkrieg. Yet, how did we get to this point? For that, we must look back to the end of the Second Weltkrieg. Canada emerged from the Second Weltkrieg as the leader of the Entente, one of 2 global factions. Although they were successful in their homecoming and the reclamation of Britain, Germany's use of nuclear weapons on the English city of Portsmouth would demonstrate that the homecoming had a price. The price of sharing the world with the Deutsches Kaiserreich. Canada would join Germany and Danubia in the formation of the Congress of Nations, an international organization aimed at preventing the re-emergence of syndicalism and ending global conflict. Canada would also set up the Accord as the military alliance for the Entente nations. The Accord's foreign policy was aimed at undermining Reichspact hegemony wherever possible. Entente interference resulted in the collapse of Middle Africa into many smaller nations, and in South America, Brazil was propped up as the force ready to take on Germany's ally of Argentina. In Asia, the Accord supported the southern Guangzhou government as a legitimate government of China. Canada would give full support to Greenlander independence to keep the Reichspact ally of Denmark away from its own backyard. And so many more proxy conflicts on top of that. After the Second Weltkrieg, the former United States of America was divided between 4 nations. Most of the country was under the rule of the American Union State, with Longism as its ideology. To the west were the Pacific States of America, a faction based in Sacramento that believed it was the rightful continuation of the United States due to their continuation of the old American ideology. The northeast was home to the Republic of New England, which was a protectorate of Canada. And finally, the Great Lakes government ruled over Michigan, Wisconsin and half of Minnesota, and served as Canada's occupation zone of the former Combined Syndicates of America. Seeking to isolate the ideology and influence of the Union State, Canada aligned the other 3 American splinter states with each other through the American Reclamation Alliance and the North American Trade Organization. The Kalterkrieg would see many proxy conflicts break out across the world, from the Americas to Africa to Asia and even in Europe. Smaller nations would go at each other with the backing of their respective global superpowers. But due to the American Union States' proximity to Canada, both Germany and Canada were reluctant to restart the American Civil War, as it was likely it would spiral into a Third Weltkrieg. Nevertheless, the Union States' economic and industrial power proved it to be by far the strongest of the American successors. Nearing the turn of the millennium, the Pacific states experienced much instability. Most Pacificers felt that they had no point being in the Accord, as they had no direct issue with Germany. On top of that, Canada held on to Alaska, who was very vocal about wanting to rejoin the Pacific states. Many in the country felt that their government had grown weak and had become a Canadian vassal, resulting in mass protests in the country during the summer of 1997. The weak government was powerless to stop the sheer amount of protesters and caved into their demands. A new government was set up by the people, and their message would change world history. They invited the American Union State to reunite the United States of America. The Baton Rouge government immediately accepted this request, and on January 12, 1999, the United States of America was declared continuing the constitution of the American Union State. After similar events in South France, Italy, Norway, Greece and South Africa over the following years, the winds of change finally came for Canada. Canadians didn't support the government's doctrine of enforcing an old alliance from over 90 years ago and investment into their allies abroad. They just wanted to look inward to themselves. On top of that, many in the outer provinces felt distant from the main government in Ottawa. On April 16, 2004, a student protest in Calgary would demand a change in government. In turn, Canadian Prime Minister Terry Edwards used the protest as an excuse to delay elections and hold on to power, increasing popular anger exponentially. 3 days later, Alberta declared its secession from Canada, followed by Saskatchewan a day later. The government sent the military in, but the citizens formed a huge human wall at the border, and in the end the Canadian military backed down. Within the following week, Alaska declared unification with the United States, and in early May, the United States would occupy British Columbia to form a land bridge with Alaska. Quebec declared independence after seeing Alberta and Saskatchewan having so much success. Edwards was impeached by the Canadian government for his attempts at becoming a dictator, as well as for his failure to keep Canada together. This was followed by the Maritimes joining New England, who survived the chaos. The new Canadian government under President Jack Turvey transformed the country into the Canadian Federation, keeping Ontario, Manitoba, Nunavut and the Northwestern Territories. Yukon requested annexation into the USA, and as the United States was already planning to occupy the territory, they accepted Yukon's collaboration. The declaration of the Canadian Federation is unanimously seen as the end of the Kalterkrieg. The early post-Kalterkrieg years would see Canada fully restructure itself, letting go of its British identity in favor of a more national Canadian perspective. Under President Turvey, Canada would try to integrate into the New World System, yet fell to rampant instability and powerful oligarchs rising in power. In 2012, President Turvey would be voted out of office, giving way to the young and very ambitious Mick Learnhouse and his far-right Revision Party. Learnhouse would strip power from the oligarchic companies and redistribute the wealth amongst the people, resulting in many calling him the Huey Long of Canada. Learnhouse himself wasn't a real fan of that nickname, as he saw the American Union State as responsible for stripping Canada of its glory and prestige. American-Canadian relations had drastically improved after the Kalterkrieg, but Learnhouse's government began reversing this trend. Canada would take an antagonistic role on the world stage, covertly funding rebellious factions across the world to extend their sphere of influence. They would find a natural ally in the Republic of Great Argentina, but more on them in a future video. The United States of America emerged from the Kalterkrieg as a reunited nation, excluding the city of Sault Ste. Marie and surrounding towns, as well as the northwestern angle, both of which were incorporated into Canada after the Second Weltkrieg. New England also stands defiant against American reintegration, forming their own national identity instead. The US foreign policy, now that their main geopolitical rival of Canada had been defeated, was to extend their influence across the Americas and reclaim the title it once held as the American power. The US found a close ally in Panama and Colombia. Although the two nations have had a troublesome history, international threats forced them together. Panama remained an accord member throughout the Kalterkrieg, as the Panama Canal was vital to Canada and her allies. Yet without the accord to protect her, Panama was becoming increasingly vulnerable from international threats, in particular from the Congress of South American Nations. The CNSA was a military and economic alliance binding Great Argentine and their direct allies together. The alliance dominated nearly the entirety of South America, and Buenos Aires saw the Panama Canal vital to the existence of its direct sphere. This is where the USA would support Panama both through international diplomacy as well as military backing. And Panama's traditional ally of Costa Rica also unofficially joined this pact. Colombia faced a similar struggle. As the last nation in South America out of Argentine reach, Colombia faced continued threats to its sovereignty. Colombia would thus reach out to Panama and the United States for security guarantees, which they would receive, forming the Pan-American coalition between these three nations. Mexico was one of two socialist nations to survive the aftermath of the Second Weltkrieg, along with Norway. This made Mexico a target for the Accord, who saw them as a syndicalist threat in their own backyard. In 1957, a coup sponsored by Canada would overthrow the government and establish the Mexican Republic as a conservative democracy. With the fall of the Entente, Mexico had no more backing and collapsed into a civil war by 2008. Currently, the main factions are neo-syndicalists, who ruled most of core Mexico, a liberal socialist movement in the south of the country, the old government retaining control over the northwest and Yucatan, and far-right groups holding over the northeast. All sides have different international backing, some from Canada, some from America, some from Argentina, and some from Germany. The Mexican Civil War is becoming a major pawn in the great game between the United States and Great Argentina. And as the final nations in the Americas are being gobbled up into the two American spheres of influence, it could be the spark to ignite the American hyperwar. Whilst Canada is severely weakened, they are still a threat to regional stability, especially to their weaker neighbors out east. New England emerged from the Kalterkrieg as a lone power, having lost their continental allies and being under continued pressure by the United States. This reality served as a wake-up call for New England, who drastically increased their own defense. With the fall of Canada, the governments of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador requested annexation into New England, all being integrated as their respective states. Two outliers to this were Newfoundland and Labrador, who were split into two states, and New Brunswick. New Brunswick held a sizable Acadian population who rebelled against Moncton after the fall of Canada. New England would negotiate with these rebels, successfully adding Acadia as the 15th state in the Union. Acadia's rebellion wasn't the only border change in French Canada though. Following the French and British revolutions of the 1920s, the exiled governments of France and Britain began exchanging territories around the world to ease governing. One example of this is the small archipelago of Saint Pierre and Miquelon off the coast of Newfoundland. These French islands were transferred to Quebec, hoping to integrate the French population into the Quebecois identity. But these attempts were unsuccessful. Following the Kalterkrieg, the islands declared their independence from Quebec, which Quebec recognized as they had just secured their own sovereignty and didn't really see the point of holding on to the small distant archipelago. Although St. Pierre and Miquelon is independent, they rely on New England for their defense. New England would take the initiative to found the North Atlantic Defense Organization with them, St. Pierre and Miquelon, Greenland and Iceland as a united front against both Canadian, British, German and American threats to their sovereignty. This will conclude this episode of 21, Dusk of the German Century. Join us next time to explore how Germany entered the new millennium, or if that video is already out, you can view it right now.
But for now, this was the end of the video.